How about you two? Can you hear me on the tubes of the internet just okay?
I gotcha.
Yeah, it's a little like
I know you guys can talk.
I'm getting a lot of static for some reason. It could be on my end.
Are you hearing static too?
It sometimes kind of cuts out for a bit, but it's not terrible for me.
Okay. So I'm going to be facing this way, which means if you want to get my attention, just feel free to talk.
Got it.
What do you think? You got enough people to get started? We're waiting on a few more. Okay. So take all of your digital devices of any type, unless of course you are on a digital device, and put them in a place where they are not physically accessible to you for the duration. You can watch. Ah, shit. It's so you're in class. All right, so here's the deal. I was hoping that you would all have watched all the sources before last class, before we got started on the conversation. I gave a little bit of an intro in the class, and then you went back and watched the thing for which you just had an intro. So before diving right into the conversation that we left off on, and I made notes, we're coming back to that, don't worry. I just want to give everyone an opportunity to react to what they saw, and react to whether or not it aligns with what you feel like we discussed in the last class, whether it contradicts something you discussed last class, or raised an issue that you never thought of before. I'd love to hear your takes on the things that you heard that you never thought of before. Who's got something?
I think for me, the whole concept of debt as what is humanity's based on was like a paradigm shift, and that was pretty cool.
Anyone else realize how central debt was to civilization?
No,
Oh,
I was just like
just raising to agree.
Yes.
Got it. Yeah, it's sort of interesting to hear about the story of civilization told through this perspective of how we exchange pieces of the physical world, how we make those agreements and keep them or not. You know, where do we define the boundaries of those agreements? So, who here thinks they can sum up as succinctly as possible arguments from Paul Mason, the big long article from The Guardian? Who wants to sum that up best they can? I'll just pick someone if no one wants to volunteer. Really? Nobody left? Tell us about The Guardian.
Can you refresh me with the title, because I don't remember which was like.
Something about the end of capitalism.
Oh, so like how, it kind of talked about how like I might be confusing this with Dylan, but like the debt is what is kind of like changing how the way society is working, because we're starting to understand that the debt is not how we used to think that was, and how it's.
The Guardian article was more about technology and how copy and pasting.
Oh, okay, I was out.
Yeah.
Okay, so
There's your practical.
so it was almost like how you were talking about the other day with open source, and how if you create something that's open source, that it's no longer like proprietary information, and that for example, someone uploads a file onto like Thingiverse, and you're able to print it so many times that amount of like physical labor that was put into the part in the first time has kind of like gone away, and that there's that because everyone can have it and just it can be readily reproduced, that like the capitalistic ideology behind me creating something so that I can get money from it is kind of going away. Whereas now you're being able to source everything and just by the click of a button all the way around the world.
Right. So technology has a labor cost for creation, but zero labor cost for reproduction. And the divergence between creation and reproduction in terms of labor cost is what is driving anything that behaves in that way to a price of zero. Because as further down the article, you see this little headline, which blew my mind the first time I read it. I just reread this paragraph over and over again about the degree to which an economy can produce profit is directly proportional to the degree to which it underutilizes information. And that the converse of that is to fully utilize information is to eliminate profit. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Because that just wrecked when I read this, the reason you're all reading this, that wrecked my understanding of how economics functions when I first read it. That, not only does that make sense, it is the way to explain the types of problems that we're running into today, for which traditional economists have no way to describe. Why is the encyclopedia industry gone? Why?
Wait. So from my understanding of it, right, the idea of like fully utilizing information is that rather than having the information being accumulated in a few hands, once you spread it across, that means more people can make use of it, right? And that's I guess that's what you mean by utilizing the information, right, to a good degree, right? And that is what's like the anti-capitalistic minded point of view, because in capitalism we're trying to accumulate as much as wealth or like information, or I'd say information, because the wealth is like very much dependent on information. So you're trying to accumulate the information and wealth to yourself and keep it for yourself essentially. You might do like philanthropic stuff and all, but like the primary objective is to gather everything within your control.
Well, it isn't just gathering the information, it's then preventing someone else from accessing it.
Okay.
There's the labor to gather, but there's zero cost to copy it. And that's the distinction where technologies that are based on information design. So he describes a 747 as just a series of databases and purchase order information about how to get the thing produced. So it took a lot of time to embody all of that knowledge into a structure that can be utilized. But strictly speaking, you just copy and paste that work tree, you can make one. 747, you can make a rocket, you can make a missile, you can make a factory of any kind. The only really important piece there is the information. And so in order to make a profit on the creation of the technology, you must then prevent someone else from utilizing it. Just prevent the utilization of information. And thereby, by preventing it, you gain a profit. It sounds a lot like our landlord not actually exchanging anything in exchange for their access to some piece of the physical world, but instead using force to coerce it. The same structure, meant to be seen as the same structure.
So it's almost like looking at it from that perspective, that like our copyright system is enforcing the capitalistic society in which we live in.
And to an ever increasing degree, because the more systems are described by information that can be copied, either we are shifting away in our technology from the ability to capture profit and replacing it with collaborative commons like Wikipedia, Linux, open source robotics, 3D printing, like there's tons of examples of what it looks like on the other side. And those are also described in that article. But what it's really doing is undermining the ability for one to capture a profit. Essentially put up a paywall, force people through coercion to pay for something for which it costs you zero labor to provide. So, you know, basic market theory, basic labor theory of value here from Adam Smith would say, you mix your labor with a piece of the physical world, you create property. But if you haven't actually done that, you haven't created property. So if the creation of an additional unit of something doesn't require any humans to labor for it, then there's a really hard time requiring someone else to labor to access it. Think about that. Does that make sense? Or does that blow your freaking mind like it did mine when I first heard it?
Well, the only problem, at least I'm having trouble like comprehending, right, is whenever you work on anything initially, right, it takes a long time to like conceptualize the idea, do research, and all that stuff, right? Like to even just make that idea, right? And initially, whenever you charge any money or fee for any idea, right, or when you license that idea, you're essentially charging a fee for the novelty and all the efforts put in. I can see that sometimes that's way out of proportion, right? The charges, but like that's the general idea. So in this concept you were discussing, we're going away from that idea of like charging significant or charging money for the initial work that you've put in and conceptualizing the idea itself.
Well, I think it's more to acknowledge the fact that the labor used to create something is a fundamentally creative endeavor, which means there are fundamental human drives to create. That will be created. There's no like human nature barrier between people creating things. So if we have the ability to create things, we will. Open source technology and the vastness of that category of thing, open source, open hardware, Arduinos in the hardware domain, Lulzbot 3D printers in the hardware domain. I love Lulzbot. They sell you a 3D printer, which is just them having done the labor to build the thing and send it off to you. Then it gives you all the design and manufacturing files so you can make another one, including the machine itself can print 40% of its own components, and they give you the files on the SD card in the box with the machine. So there are ways of doing this that don't really require, there's ways of running an economy that don't really require thinking of everything as property and then imagining everything to be scarce when it really isn't. So, just for the basics of the word, economy, you're trying to economize scarce resources, figure out how best to utilize resources that are definitionally scarce. Is there an economy for air on Earth? We can talk about the expanse and how that plays out in space, but
Not yet.
right now, is there an economy for air?
I think people sell like canned air in like third world countries. There's a lot of like smog and
Okay,
it's small. It's not like a big
yeah, so insofar as there is already a big player attempting to kill a population by polluting the air, they can then turn around and sell the solution to the problem they created. Yeah, I mean, that's like, I'm gonna attempt to murder a bunch of people and then sell them bulletproof vests. Am I a good guy? I'm still shooting at them. No, I'm not the good guy here. But the point being that without violent coercion, like I'm going to poison your air and then force you to pay me to unpoison it, without violent coercion, there's no economy for something that is abundant. What else is abundant in our civilization?
I think energy is a big one, but for me, that doesn't seem like a.
You still need a thing to access the energy. Information, I would say, is abundant. There is no shortage of information. Try to start a business, you'll learn very quickly. There are no shortage of ideas. No one's going to pay you for an idea. Ever. No one will pay you for an idea. They'll pay you for a complete reduction to process implementation of a monetization scheme. But it's the implementation always that they pay for. Never the idea. Never happened.
You're talking about right now, or
right now? Yeah, right now. There will never be someone who will just pay you for having an idea.
well, Kevin.
Sorry. One second. He's been talking a lot. Hold on, Robotics. Go.
What about like loans when you go to the bank for like a small business or something?
Yeah, go try that. I dare you. If you don't have collateral, you don't have a loan. If you don't have revenue, you definitely don't have law. If you don't have both, you don't have law.
But in a sense, aren't you coming to them with an idea? Maybe you give them a couple of dollars, but they're still
No, they're not paying. First of all, they're not paying you. They're lending it to you, and in exchange, taking from you the control of the asset for which you put up as collateral. And if you pay them back, which is again not being paid, it's paying back. If you pay them back, then you get your asset back. It's, you know, getting a loan like that is, you know, just an advanced pawn shop, large scale pawn shop scheme. You know, and then if you don't pay it back, they get all the money that you did pay plus the asset. So that's like double screwed. Who wants that? Also, yeah, you're not getting that loan. Like I can just, from experience up and down and having studied this, yeah, you're not getting that loan. That's not actually a true thing that happens in real life. Unless, of course, you put up collateral equivalent to the amount of loan, which means you already had the money. So you can leverage an asset you already have. Yes, that's true. You just can't get fresh money. That doesn't happen. Short of people sort of giving away capital in competitions for, you know, strictly egalitarian reasons. But not part of the economy. The economy does not have a structure that is, you know, economizing non-scarce resources. It can't. It just doesn't function that way.
What services?
So
Like
services are labor. Services are fundamentally labor, which means you're paying for someone's labor.
But that's not finite.
Well, yeah, you have only so many hours in a day. Either you're being paid for your time, or you're being paid for something you didn't actually do. So there's two kinds of things. There's like a physical, you know, user receives 1 hour of service proportional to 1 hour of someone's labor to provide that service. That is pay for service. However, if you're paying for, you know, like Pandora, where it's an algorithm, you're paying for no labor. So it took my labor to earn that money. I have to spend time at work to earn the money, but then nobody had to work to receive my money for the Pandora subscription. There's no labor involved, it's just information processing, which means that is a fundamentally destabilizing element in the economy. As people with algorithms and technology aggregate together for themselves all the money, which in hint is happening.
That reminds me, so I went back and watched the social dilemma
Yes.
on Netflix, and that makes me think about that, how it's like in there they visualize it as like those three guys behind it, but it's that algorithm. They're still just making money off of all these ads and everything.
And strictly speaking, they're not making money off the ads, they're making money off of the data they can prove where they can manipulate you. So they're selling your manipulability. And if you were not manipulable, they would have no product. So that they couldn't demonstrate manipulability, which they can scientifically, then they would have no product to sell. No one would buy it.
So if you are like looking at those ads and that manipulability, does then that mean that you're then putting labor into it because you're thinking about it? Or
You're the product. You're not the sales. So it's like, it's asking a question about cattle. Did the cattle put labor into the steak that you made? I mean, the cattle's not considered an entity in this description, just like you're not considered a person. You're a product. You're a piece of meat that they sell. Is everyone happy with the idea that they're considered pieces of meat by the technology company that they use to be bought and sold at market continuously? I'm not happy about that. I don't like that at all. It sucks that it's true, but it is. Nobody's really happy. Hopefully nobody's really happy about it once you understand it. I feel like the only way to really be happy about Google and Facebook is to like just not know. And that gets to the point that I wanted to make, and picking up on our conversation from last Thursday. So, if you'll recall, the end of the conversation was the question of, if you create a technology, to what degree are you culpable for the consequences of that technology? And as a preface to this, I want to start with the concept of knowability. That's why I wanted to, good segue, right? So knowability refers to not what is known, but what could be known. Everything that is known is technically part of the knowable spectrum. However, if you don't know something, it could be one of two things. It could be unknowable, or simply you just didn't choose to know. So if something is knowable and you've chosen not to know, you're equally culpable for the consequences. Which is why you want to look at, when you develop a technology, what are the knowable consequences of creating this thing? And if you know the consequences, or if you could know the consequences, then you have a problem. You are morally accountable for whatever those knowable consequences are. If it is impossible to be known what the consequences are, someone takes your technology, misuses it in a way that it was never intended to be used, as evidenced by the development process creating the thing in the first place, who's used it in an unknowable way, abused, effectively abused at that point, then that is beyond the scope of knowability and therefore beyond the scope of your moral consequence. So, the real question comes down to, have you really thought and asked about what your technology is doing? So when you create something, you go to a business, and if there was a way for you to find out how your technology would get used, maybe you just chose not to. You didn't ask the boss, you didn't ask the other team members, you just chose not to ask. Well, you're morally culpable for whatever it is you create, still. However, you're now taking on moral responsibility for things you've chosen not to know until eventually you find out later. You know, everyone who makes guns and missiles should have a death counter on their desk, so they know. Is this really what you intended to do? Tick, tick, 5 ticks, tick, tick, tick. Everyone should know the consequences of what they're doing, because everyone could know. That's the thing about information. It's easy. There's a lot of information. Information is not scarce. So to claim you didn't know is just like saying, I claim I didn't know the law. Is that a defense in the legal domain? I didn't know that was legal. No, never, not even a little bit. Ignorance of the law does not absolve you of the consequences.
Well, it depends.
No.
I mean,
No, it does not depend.
no. I'm saying if it's super obvious, right? That this should have been like this consequence should have been preemptively. You should have known about this, right? Then of course it's your responsibility. In the cases where it's completely new technologies and almost all of the some of the intricate effects are unknown, right? At that point, how would you assign responsibility, even if, because I know we covered in the class at some point that if you ignore the simplest standards set in the industry, right, then it's reckless endangerment, right? If there's if the implication was so unique that nobody had thought about it, and it would not be expected in general to have known about such a thing, then that's a defense. That's a legal defense.
Okay, so what you're saying is legal defense. And you're right, legal defense allows you to wriggle out of things for which you are morally responsible, despite the fact that you are part of the actual cause. If you are not close enough to the proximal cause, you can wriggle out of it in the US legal system. I think that's a fundamental flaw of the legal system, actually, is what you're describing, and it defines the distinction between morality and legality. You know, these are not the same things. Just because it's legal doesn't mean it's moral. Just because it's moral doesn't mean it's illegal. These are totally orthogonal axes that, you know, we as democratic members of our civilization try to trend our legal system towards our current morality. But again, morality is sort of the thing for which all of humanity can agree on, which, you know, is a vanishingly small subset of things. You know, most of us can agree on the sort of the fundamental legal libertarian principles, but beyond that, everyone's going to start to debate. You know, I have a right not to have violence enacted upon me. like that is probably as far about down the road of a thing we should make a state to do that pretty much everyone could agree upon. Yeah, no violence. However, there are plenty of asterisks to that. So, first of all, well, how are we going to do that? We're going to make police. Well, what do the police do? Well, they're our gang. They commit violence on behalf of the state. Shit. All right, well, round and round we go. There's, at the end of the day, morality and legality have not a lot to do with each other. So while you're right, you can wriggle out of these things from a legal perspective, the morality never goes away. If you are part of the actual cause, you're part of the actual cause. And if you didn't know the consequences at the time, well, then maybe you should have thought real hard.
I mean,
and that's really the thing that I'm trying to leave you with. That if you walk away from this thinking that there's a way out of this other than intense study on a consistent basis of the potential consequences of your actions, that's just the required behavior for a robotics engineer. You consistently have to do this, and if you don't, you are going to do something horrible because you have power beyond anyone else in civilization at this point. When you grow up, you will have defined the world you live in. Nobody else. That's not true for business majors. That's not true for mathematicians. It's not true for physics majors. It's not true for teachers. That's not true for anyone but roboticists right now, because this is the technology that is expanding and encompassing all of the economic activity of human civilization. Which means your decisions matter a great deal more than your average citizen. This is not, do I go to Chipotle, do I go to, taco, whatever, this is not an arbitrary personal decision. And it does not come with the same sort of arbitrariness that we make those decisions. Well, I didn't know the consequences of, getting E. coli from Nova. So, all right, well, that's a personal consequence. You will suffer the consequences of eating a canola, no one else. I mean, maybe your roommates have to deal with that afterwards, but you suffer your own consequence for your own decision. Robotics gives you the power, like it or not, that whatever decisions you actually do end up making will affect the lives of billions of people. Not millions, billions. Because again, you make a technology and it can be copied and pasted and copied and pasted. Imagine our Technocopia machine, right? There's consequences to making something like that. I will bear the moral consequence of destroying the banking system. That's a thing I will, never be able to wriggle out of, for better or worse. I will bear those consequences. Because those are the knowable consequences of the machine engine. It's a choice. Now I could just go work for Goldman Sachs and get a ton of money. How they fucking recruited me. I could go do that. That is definitely within my sphere of capabilities. But I understand the consequences. I understand the consequences of what I'm doing. Or at least I understand the potential knowable consequences. I don't know all of them. Another potential consequence of my actions could be I fail and wasted my damn life. That's a consequence that I will suffer. But then, again, I'm not just making technology for me here. I'm making it and giving it away for free. So everyone who has access to even the increments, one little library, one little piece that I made as part of my big vision of how to make the world a better place, because that's the only metric by which I judge any action I take. Is this making the world a better place or not? Can I know that it is? Or can I know that it at least is not making it worse? That's how I judge a decision. Do I work on this project? Do I take this job? Why am I here at WBI making not great salary, but fine, just enough that I don't have to worry about money? You think I could be doing something more lucrative? Yeah. I get recruited by Google. I get recruited by Goldman Sachs on an annual basis. They call up, hey, you want to? No. Why? Because I understand the moral consequence of contributing my labor to those organizations and what they're doing in the world. It means I take the sacrifice. But in the long run, there's a reason for that. We're going to end today with a thought experiment. Not quite there yet. We're just going to explain why. Okay, so that was my reintroduction of the problem. So now, when you make something, do you understand? You're responsible. Everyone feel that responsibility? Now, this is not a doom and gloom class. We're not sitting here saying, now that you understand, do nothing. Fuck off and read books. Like, that's not where we're going with this. It is to say that you can make a difference. You can make a world that you want to live in. Because you're going to live in the world that you make. Whatever you choose to do, how you, who are powerful, different than the rest of society, held to a higher standard than the rest of society because of that. When you make a decision to do something, that affects the world at large, and it's going to change the world that you will then retire into. So you have to remember at some point, you're going to be old and gray. Getting there. You're going to be eventually in a position where you are no longer an actor in society, you are subject to it. You're not rich anymore, you're not powerful, you're not in charge of whatever you are, you're retired. And you have to simply exist in the society as it was created. Understanding that the society that you create always takes care of, or not, the people that are working. So the question is, you need to structure a society so that when you get there, it's going to work for you. Now, if we understand the destabilizing force of technology, you really think pensions are going to survive 401ks? Do we really have confidence that's going to be there in any meaningful way by the time we get there? I don't know. I mean, look, I got the 401k through the school. It'll be there or it won't. I'm not going to beg on it. I'm still going to build my machine, just in case. But the question is, when you get there, when you're old in your bed, and are subject to whatever the civilization does to its old people, pay close attention to how it treats those people now. You know, the elderly, the children, the mentally incapable of providing for themselves, the vulnerable in society. How do we treat them? Do we do better? Is it perfect? We've done. Is this the end of history, as Fukuyama would say? Have we like reached the pinnacle? There's nowhere to go, or is it maybe robotics is going to change a lot of the equations that we use to decide what we do? Because today I want to really focus on, okay, well that's all well and good, but what do we do? Not quite as easy a question as you probably came in the door with. I bet all of you had like an idea, I'm going to work in this business, I'm going to do the job. They've been feeling like a little bit uneasy with that original assumption that you came to WBI with. A couple nods. It's good. You're actually reacting. Tell me about your unease. Guys, him back there.
I've already secured a position for the fall, and I'm just thinking about it now. I'm going to be working on this guidance unit for autonomous vehicles. I think that autonomous vehicles are a good thing to develop, so I'm comfortable with that, but I'm thinking out further than that now. And I mean, I'm going to be working for a multi-billion-dollar industry where I really don't have much of a say in what I work on. That's making me about that.
Yeah, autonomy, mastery, and those are our sort of core drives, to be in control of what we do, to be a master of what we do, to really look at not the traditional drives of, you pay more, you get more labor, but instead look at what is it that really motivates humans, and it's not money. It's only money when it comes to like labor, physical work where there's no thinking involved. Pay people more, you get more work. For intellectual pursuits, you pay people more, you get worse performance. Everyone realize that? Does everyone know that that is true? Like repeated in the US, out of the US, everywhere in society, everywhere in human culture. For physical work, like digging a ditch, pay them more, get more ditch. For mental, even like rudimentary, like add, subtract, blah, 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 very simple mental labor, you pay them more, you get less. Yeah.
What do you mean by that? Do you have any examples that illustrate that? Because I don't.
Yeah, I have some sources I'll send them out. But basically, there are many anthropological studies, and basically, this is sort of one of those things that anthropologists do studies on. Say, hey, those assumptions that we have in other disciplines like economics and whatnot, let's actually test them. Behavioral economics. It's sort of this new field that they're trying to define, where they use data and science to justify economics. It's not going well because the data and science contradicts the economics more than it does support it. But yeah, if you pay people for digging ditches or physical labor, the more you pay, the more dirt they haul. That is a true statement. However, if it involves doing math, remembering things, creating things, anything creative or mentally labor intensive, if you offer a greater reward, you get worse and worse performance. And it's just, that's how human minds behave. Perhaps counterintuitive, because you've heard so many times from economists that that's not how it works, but the story from an economist is only a special case. It's a special case of labor and labor only, not mental work. Mental work is totally different, which means what actually motivates people to do more mental labor? What's the next question these scientists asked? And the answer was giving people control over their own projects, having them have the ability to refine the work that they do and become a master at it. And these are our fundamental drives, not money. Money is not a fundamental drive. Actually, money gets in the way of many and again, to sort of zoom back out and look at the whole thing, as everything in the economy moved away from labor and towards mental labor, we realize that paying people to work and then failing to pay them when they don't work, essentially, or failing to pay them when they don't come up with a job, as if it's the worker's job to come up with a job, failing to pay them doesn't motivate them to get any more of that intellectual labor done. In fact, all it does is get in the way. Odd. Very odd. It also makes a lot more sense when you realize how much of open source software actually runs industry, and that the industries don't get nearly as much done for paying people, forcing them to work on some software project. You don't really get much done. And then, businesses like Atlassian, which is an Australian business, it's sort of like a paid version of everything you see on GitHub, but they've been running it for years before GitHub came along, so they still have a business. Now, Atlassian would do this experiment. Every Friday, they'd say, or from Thursday at midnight to Friday at midnight, work on whatever you want. Anything you want. Just we have a couple of rules. Or they do this once a month, maybe. I don't know. Some pattern where it was regular enough people can predict it, but not so regular that it became just another thing they had to do. And so what people would do is go out and fix the bugs that were driving them nuts. Not because their boss told them to, but because they knew, because the workers always really know what to do. It's just administration that gets in the way of getting it done. Bosses like being in charge. It doesn't mean they're good at it, it just means they like it. So the reality of what Lansing demonstrated was that when you just sort of take the reins off and let people choose what they want to work on, they got like 80% of their monthly productivity in that 124-hour period. 80%! What the? That's crazy. It's crazy to us who think that you have to pay people to get more money or to get more effort. One would think if you want to get these bugs solved, you'd have to offer a big cash prize. Well, it turns out that diminishes the actual intellectual labor it takes to do the thing. It makes it so that we can't do it. Or at least don't.
So is that kind of like for example, like if like the saying like choose a job, or if you love your job so much like you never work a day in your life, it's almost like that, whereas you're more willing to do it for free. All kind of also explains or is like a side effect, I guess, of getting better labor out from paying them less because they are more doing it for their mental benefit.
Well, it's not about paying them less. It's about you have to pay people enough so that you take the question of money off the table. Once people no longer have to worry about money, then money is no longer a motivator. And that's the real insight here. That you can pay everyone in the world $70,000 a year and get exactly as much productivity as you get now. Just enough to cover expenses. And it's, as long as no one is sitting there worrying on a day-to-day basis about money, then the problem of money disappears out of your mind and you don't spend your mental labor worrying about it and you can concentrate on anything else. You want to get bad performance out of people, don't pay them enough. You want to get good performance out of people, pay them enough that they don't have to worry about money, and stop telling them what to do. A little bit of counter business propaganda here, but yeah, if you actually want people to do something, you can't tell them what to do. Because that's not how humans function well. The only time it works is with physical labor things. And as we know from our robotics background, anything physical can and will be automated. Gone. So all the things that paying people to work for works are going away because of the work we do. And we know for scientific certainty that people will simply create all the necessary information of society simply for the mastery and the self-directed aspect of doing it, because they have and they do continuously for decades now, consistently. It's consistently increasing, actually. It does sort of raise the question of, okay, so what's next then? Are we really heading towards a world where everything's better, so long as we keep everything the same? Or do we have to change something for it to not suck for everyone? I don't know. Again, it all boils down to you and your decisions. What type of robot do you build? You all get together, or not get together, just sort of individually come to the conclusion that big businesses, big military contractors pay well, therefore I'm going to do the thing that pays me the most because that's obviously better, as if those things are correlated. And you build a world where the roboticists just spent their time making death machines and coercion propaganda tools, which, by the way, advertising company, propaganda tool. Keep your terminology straight. Make sure anytime you hear advertising or public relations that you mentally substitute propaganda and then understand that. It's really important that those are substitutions that your mind makes whenever you hear it. Advertising equals propaganda. Same thing, same thing. Absolutely the same thing. I can give you some pretty fun resources on that one. Eddie Bernays, man, that guy was a crazy person. But shaped a lot of our understanding of public relations. coined the term public relations, in fact, after World War II, when propaganda got a public relations problem. I mean, it's phrased as a joke, but that's actually literally the story. He coined the term public relations because of the public relations problem of the term propaganda. Turns out, when Nazis associate themselves with just about anything, nobody else really wants to play ball anymore. So, when you make a decision on what kind of thing you spend your time working on, you then need to extrapolate, how is this shaping the world that I, as an old, infirm person that needs to be dependent on this state that I'm creating, how will that person have to interact with society?
Why do we need Canada?
Well, in what way are robots prevented from entering Canada? You know, let's be perfectly honest here. That anything you can say about a problem you had in the States is merely just a precursor of the same problem happening somewhere else. We are not the leading edge anymore, but now you might be seen as sort of we were always just a few years ahead, and if we're on the decline, hint, that's where everyone else is coming.
Less leading edge, more bleeding edge?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's more along the lines of, we will just have the successes first, we will have the downsides first. We're just on that leading edge because of our head start out of the gate on World War II. You know, we didn't enter the war until like the last 2 years, while everyone else has been fighting. The Russians lost 20 million people in fighting the Nazis. The U.S. showed up, lost 500,000, and we cried about it for literally the rest of the time. And then completely forgot that the Russians actually fought that war. You know, that's the war that fought. And the Chinese fought the other half of the war. The Russians and the Chinese fought World War II. We somehow declare ourselves the victor. It's a weird way of looking at the data. And yet, we gained a tremendous advantage because our factories were the only ones that weren't bombed to shit. The small subset of factories that Stalin moved out past the Urals. But he did have to rip down his entire industrial base and rebuild it in the course of 2 years. So, you know, they were a bit behind. Everyone was behind. Europe was bombed into rubble. Like, the whole damn thing. The US was not. Japan was bombed into rubble. The whole damn thing. The US was not. Can't imagine why the US did really well in the 50s and 60s. You know, who's competing with us? No one. Then when did things start like going bad? When everyone finished rebuilding their damn factories. You know, Europe comes online in the mid-70s. Japan finally got its shit together in the early 80s. China is now, you know, an equivalent industrial powerhouse by the late 90s, and arguably has surpassed the United States now. So you look at our trajectory, and it's not trajectory of the economy, which is zooming upwards like it always does. But look at the trajectory in terms of the purchasing power of citizens of the civilization. How much labor does it cost you to access a thing? Where labor is defined by number of hours of minimum wage by the thing. So what you want to do is compare hours to hours. Hours of minimum wage here, hours of minimum wage there. And it's a really interesting set of comparisons to actually look at how many hours did it cost to go to WPI in 1959. You know, the answer is like 230. Okay, now someone do today, how many hours of minimum wage does it cost 1 year of tuition? Is it more than 230 or less than 230?
More.
Someone want to bang that out real quick?
Probably 100 times more than that.
Pretty close to, somewhere there. Someone actually do it.
What's the tuition?
Yeah. Question. Wow, 70?
Well, that's it, like room and board.
Yeah.
meals,
Because
all
the
that.
whole thing. So I actually have one of my mentors from high school went to WPI and graduated class in 1959. So actually know how much it was. It's $400 a year. Minimum wage was $250. So someone want to do that math?
I assume the minimum wage is $7.25.
The federal minimum wage is $7.25. So yeah.
Cool. So it's $9,655.
All right. So you're gonna do that over the summer? Just bang out at 9,000 hours over the course of 3 months. Sure. Perfect.
Wait, it was, what, how much did it cost?
$400, room and board included.
Yeah.
And minimum wage was $250 an hour.
That's 160 hours.
So you should now understand it's not WPI that has changed, it's the civilization that has changed. Your labor doesn't get you as much. While your wage goes up, prices go up faster. Welcome to the power of compounding interest. You're on the shit end. You're not a massive asset holder, you're always going to be on shit. You can do the same calculation with healthcare, you can do the same calculation with transportation, cars, you can do the same calculation with housing costs. The only thing that kind of went down is TVs. TVs cost a little less. Cool. No, great.
So you're saying
They're
that,
about half.
like the hourly cost for basically like the vast majority of products and services in America has increased like just a shit ton. Like
Just a
some
shit
cases-
ton. Yeah.
Some cases tenfold, some other cases 100-fold.
And with the trend, not just going up, but accelerating. The amount of hours required to do the access, just, the basic CPI set of necessities, food, shelter, healthcare, communication, transportation, education, those subset of things, those are just, not just going up, exponentially up, relative to minimum wage. Okay? That's a really important concept that flies in the face of a lot of assumptions. Because we see the economy going up and we pretend as if that's us succeeding. But we are not the economy. What is it going up? What does the economy measure? What does the S&P 500 actually measure?
GDP?
Say?
The GDP?
Not exactly. It is asset prices, essentially. The assets, the bond values of the 500 largest corporations. So it's sort of a basket of the largest 500 corporations, average. So that's the S&P 500 points system. It's sort of the quotient of the price of each of the things. All 500 lumped together. Now, the reason it always goes up is because if you're on the S&P 500 and you're going down, they kick you off. To go up on. It's why it always goes up. Which is also why you can always say an index fund will be anything, because they'll just kick things off index funds that don't perform, and that the index will always go up. So, yeah, you're not benefiting from this. Now, as engineers, you'll have a pretty good salary. You probably wouldn't have to worry about this much. But it isn't just a linear thing. Unless your salary goes up exponentially with time, then you're going to get caught in this just as much as everyone else. As I said last week, the last job singular will be a roboticist. Who all thinks you're going to beat me to it? Or one other person similar to me? Or a version of me with fewer scruples, of which you can probably imagine a couple. That's a thing you have to contend with. Now the question is, how do you make this world not suck? What do you then do? What could you do? What are things you could do? It isn't just dedicating your life like a hermit monk to the pursuit of open source technology, which I would happily do if there was a monastery for open source technology. I'd be there in a heartbeat. But what could you actually do? Let's imagine the world is not going to suck and you're going to make a not sucky version. What are you doing on the path to the not sucky world?
I mean, some technologies have seemed pretty, but like if you even just with like minimal thought, maybe I might be wrong about this, but it seems like for instance, like solar power, like this is just like one example of a technology that, like the positive impact on the world seems way greater than the negative impact. And for roboticists, there's like similar things like I would argue like bionics or something, like that's gonna have a markedly better impact on the world than negative. That's more controversial probably than the solar power.
Prosthesis and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, great. I mean, you could simply say, I'm going to do something that doesn't do harm, that I find boring for my day job, and dedicate my evening hours to open source development. That's making the world a better place, as long as you're not making it worse. You know, there's plenty of little things like that.
Well, also, as long as that whole open source development is, as long as like you review the open source development and like as you said before, really think critically about whether it'll have a more positive impact on the world or more negative impact.
Yeah, I mean, in open source development, you can do things like specify the license. There are licenses that say no cops. You can't use this for policing. No policing or military use of this software. It's totally a valid term in the license, and you know, so long as we still have laws in the country and the ACLU, it'll defend shit like that pro bono. If anyone uses it for purposes that you've specified as disallowed, they can be sued until they stop. Same with commercial. You say non-commercial license. This is not for commercial use, and not be used for commercial use. Just put that right out there. Does limit things a bit more, but yeah, if you're the author of the open source software, you have complete control over the terms of the license that you provide. Yeah.
If you were like companies, if they see open source software, they can review that, make their own version that's like functionally identical but different enough where legally they're in the clear, and the government can do this as well. So like if you make something that can be beneficial to the military, you can't just be like, oh, there's some slap license on it, everything's good. Like software contaminated, it's like you still allow the
No, you forced an engineer to re-engineer an entire technology. You forced them to spend their labor to reinvent the technology. You didn't do nothing. That engineer is the one who did the really bad thing. Not only are they violating that license, so there's legal implications for that engineer, by the way, just doing that is exactly how Google got caught up in a big lawsuit with Oracle. You know, that's a good way to get sued. It's a great way to get sued. And because Oracle won, there's precedent. You will lose. You'll lose. Doing that is not generally allowed. Or at the very least, there are legal precedents that will definitely knock you down a few pegs if you try. So, you know, to that end, what do you do? And let's think less about what you wouldn't do, because you know, it's easy to come up with things you wouldn't want to do. But what would you want to do? Imagine the utopian world we would like to live in. What does it look like? Maybe better pointers. Let's take a step back and do our own little individual utopian thought experiment. I want you each to take a few minutes and think. I'm not going to talk, I'm just going to think. It's going to make for a super boring video for this next few sections, but just think. Imagine our Technocopia machine that we described last week. The machine that starts with a couple 3D printers and can be bootstrapped in any makerspace anywhere in the world, piece by piece by piece, building out the factory. Now imagine you've built yourself a factory. You have all material resources you currently and will forever need. No more material dependence on requiring someone else's labor to make something. Gone. That is gone. What do you do? Where do you go? What do you make?
if you pull a John McAfee and buy an island.
I mean, there actually, interestingly enough, the first time I proposed this this concept back in 2009 was on a subreddit on Reddit called Reddit Island, where they were planning on buying an island and moving a population onto it. It's sort of absurd, and I wanted to play this out as a thought experiment. So the first version of the Technocopia machine that I described was on that subreddit saying, okay, well, if you want to live on an island, here is the complete technological infrastructure you need to do so. And it started with okay, what would you need to live on an island, and kind of broadly became, wait a second. This is just as valid for Detroit as it is for Mars, as it is for an island. Interesting. Stick it on a boat, go travel the world. You know, stick it in the middle of Sahara where there's no claim on land. Just pull the air, water you need right out of the air with reverse osmosis. If you have energy, you have water. We're on a water planet. We're on a water planet. You need water, you get it. Pull it right out of the air. Just takes energy. I want to hear about your plans. What are you going to do? Who's got something they know what they would do? I'm going to Mars. I know I'm going to put it in a tin can, go to Mars, we're going to do Mars colony things. That's my plan for the Technocopia machine. Prove it out locally, ship it off to Mars. Cool. Martian pioneer. You're here. What else we got?
I mean, I feel like one of the most important like tasks for a robot to like maintain just really like the easiest way for robots to directly improve the world. Besides Utopia, because that would remove lots of production and stuff, and that's probably the number one way. I would say probably waste removal. So that'd be anywhere from I would say anywhere from like conservancies and natural environments all the way to there's already becoming a problem with trash in space, and there's already plans for robots clearing that and there's a possible cascading effect which could result in the destruction of lots of our view from Earth to the stars. But then I'd say in general, waste removal is probably the number one way a robot can benefit the world besides
but I want you to imagine less about what robot would benefit the world. I want you to think about what you will do when you have a Technocopia machine entirely to yourself. What are you going to do? Now, if your answer is I want to build waste disposal robots, that is a noble endeavor indeed. A interesting choice, but definitely a noble endeavor. Actually, no. Take away the sex. That's a noble endeavor. Yes, making technology that makes the world happier, safer, and cleaner for everyone. Great. Great.
Something like a system that would help generate the necessary, the food, water, shelter, the necessities to life. Whether that be you bring that to an area so it provides food and water, or it provides the materials that you need to build shelters, or itself builds shelters.
Right. So you are a seed on the wind. You have your Technocopia machine, and you flit around the world, seeding machines places. Travel the world in the highest possible standard of activity, where you move from place to place, sit down for 3 months, build a new machine, move on. Call that the Johnny Appleseed model. You just Johnny Appleseed the things all over. Want one? Great, let's set it up. Cool, you all set? I'm gonna take the show on the road and set it up another one somewhere else. Maybe pre-build the next one when you land, set it up. Great, absolutely great. Travel the world, making it better. What are you gonna do?
Sure. I would find a way to integrate myself fully into the sea of data.
Ah, so the neural link model.
Even like as deeper than that, like as deep as you can go.
All right, so full Borg.
Just in the
We
computer.
are the Borg.
Yeah. Yeah.
Resistance is futile.
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean,
deal with the body.
I've always wanted to have someone imagine a sci-fi universe with something like the Borg that isn't evil, that like you just simply opt in. Because if you allowed for opting in and out, or opting what level of technology you want to, like, if they allowed for personal choice, the Borg would be awesome. Because you could have a system like that where you can integrate the community mind. Just rewatch Voyager, so you get this sort of descriptions from the perspective of the Borg that there's a certain harmony to being in the collective, but the thing that sucks is the lack of choice of joining and the lack of choice of leaving. You know, add those two pieces of choice and also lack of choice of how much of yourself you'd like to incorporate.
Yeah.
Add personal choice to it. Yeah, the Borg do sound like an interesting option.
My view of it, it's like a depth that you can go into and out of by choice. Because when you can die and become part of the data, and then you can reform yourself out of it. Because once you join like all the sea of the internet, whatever that is, all collected of data, it's pretty much just dying put into the internet.
Wow. Yeah, that's really deep, actually. That's a really interesting concept. Entering into the data stream in the form of death and then exiting it as an escape from death, ultimately, is something that humanity has imagined since the beginning. How do we escape death? That all these technologies that we build, these legacies that we build, are our death denial mechanisms. It's really hard to be a sentient being that is aware of our eventual death. And so much of what we do in civilization is about either denying that reality or imagining ourselves to be able to defeat it in one way or another. Having children, your self continues beyond you. Creating technology, books, writing our words for generations to come. They're all forms of escaping death. And so that literally putting the word to it right there is fascinating, actually. It's a really interesting way of thinking about technology as not just escaping death, but obsoleting the concept. In much the way we have in this last two lectures, obsoleted the concepts of absolute property and the idea of scarcity. Because those two things are equally strong in the minds of our civilization now. Not always, it's not a human nature thing. Not all humans think in terms of property, not all humans think in terms of the sort of absolutes of property. But some do, some certainly do. So here we are now understanding that information technology is defeating our ideas of property, sort of defeating it out from under us. And we have to imagine something else. That's a really good answer. A little more esoteric than I was expecting, but we could certainly. Now, I would love to spend a whole class on death denial strategy, because that is a fascinating but ultimately very depressing topic. Who else would do something cool? What would you do?
I have a question. Is are you asking what we do with the Technocopia machine itself, or like the said profits, or not profits, but basically you're set for life and you can basically do other things? I'm confused.
Well, you can do anything where if you imagine that you literally have this whole machine, and anything that can be produced in the machine, you can have. So, right, if the thing you need to do requires more than this machine can make, okay, then you're going to have to make some collaboration with the rest of society. Now, for example, spacefaring civilization. You want to be a spacefaring civilization, you're only need a little bit more than carbon. We're going to need our titanium, aluminum, and steels. We're going to need industrial production to support those things, and we're going to need a group of humans all collaborating together on those resources to do that. So that, what we all do together is also another way of saying government. So the things that are outside of the Technocopia machine, so management of the high-level infrastructure, make sure people don't use land that needs to not be used by humans so that we have a stable biosphere. Make sure that the minerals are mined at reasonable rates and just sort of keep track of how much we have. There's a term for that called resource-based economy. Hilariously, it is abbreviated RBE. So if you search RBE on the rest of the internet and you're not a student, you come up with a different thing called resource-based economies, which actually involve robots. I've always wondered if that was a clever name scheme, or just they wanted to do robotics and engineering, and religion had RBE. So yeah. Anyway, so you can assume if the thing that you want to do can be made by this machine, can make boats and cars and airplanes, can make whatever you want, because you can make the pieces of whatever you want. You just sort of assemble your ultralight and go, fine, cool. However, if it is going to require some massive infrastructure, make a big evacuated tube network, make rockets that go to space, make the billions of solar panels, which are more efficient to be made out of silicon than the ones that are made out of carbon. You can make it out of carbon, solar panel, sheet of graphene with a little carbon nanotubes in. Boom, solar panel. You can make it out of carbon. It's not quite so easy as making it out of silicon. Right? So certain things make more sense as vitamins as their production method. However, once you say, all right, this is a vitamin, it's a universal utility, then that's a thing that should be made by all of us, not by some individual. Governmental structure is how I would imagine it. Same way roads and the courts and the things that have to be universal and guaranteed. Those, the access to clean water, access, guaranteed that you can't live in a place if it doesn't have sewage treatment, or some access to a sewer system. These are laws that we put in place in terms of structuring our society now. So one can imagine a very similar thing. In the same way we have a water utility, you just have a solar panel production utility. Like, oh, I need a few more panels. We'll ship to you when you need them. They last for 50 years. It's not like there's going to be, you're going to have like a big spike of production, but then plateaus for a century. Because strictly speaking, we don't need to produce a ton of panels continuously, so the profit margin for that is going to disappear, and we can't have the production of solar panels going away, so we just put it into a utility. So anything that would fit in those structures, you can try to kind of imagine that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, so now
Oh, well, I was thinking the whole time, and I work at Elmberg Elementary, and
great.
so a lot of kids there come from, they're not very privileged, so I was thinking allocating resources towards schools like that, because bringing into current day, we have the census, and they keep trying to move the dates and things, and some think, and I agree with them, that they are trying to move up the date so that we're not getting the most accurate data, so they can allocate funds to places that they're allocating funds places where it should be allocated somewhere else to underprivileged places like that. So I was thinking something along the lines of underprivileged children, either in the school system, updating their resources there, or even just having kits or something that you can teach children and start stimulating their minds to start thinking about how they can make the world a better place.
Great. So let's play through the thought experiment then. let's imagine, all right, you have your Technocopia machine, and you know, we define these things as fitting into a Walmart. So the capacity is about steady state, 5,000 individuals can be serviced by this one machine. When you try to make them smaller and service fewer people, you get stability problems where the throughput of each thing doesn't necessarily work. But 5,000 people packed, or 5,000 people's worth of stuff annually packed through this machine probably makes sense. Now, when you look at it from the perspective of you as an educator, so we're going to cement you as the educator, or you're now the principal, right? Cool. The school has its own machine, the population that it's servicing. So it can make all the food. So underprivileged, okay, we're directly addressing some of that. Food, shelter, clothing. We have shelter problems, we can make more. We have clothing problems for the students, we make more. The food problem, we make enough, not just lunches, you know, in fairness, I grew up on food stamps and I had free lunches. I grew up in the, you know, the nanny state. That was how I was able to gain access to a place like WPI. I was not rich and privileged, but I lived in a town that just close enough on the public school side that it was good enough I would be able to get in. So I gained from the town gathering together and the municipality paying for the school system to exist. Now, had I lived somewhere else, I wouldn't have had that same privilege. What one can imagine with Technocopia as a concept, anywhere that is underprivileged is just another way of saying it's a resource. So this whole idea that resources are determined by the federal government and the federal census is just such an absurd concentration of power out of the hands of the individuals who are affected and able to make that change. So my answer to that would simply be say, great, the focus or the way to look at that is to say, give the school the machine so that the school has everything that it needs to run, to provide for the educators, and to provide for the students within it. And then all of a sudden, what does it actually cost to run a school? Like, what does it cost anymore? What do we even mean by cost? Because if the educators themselves are living within the Technocopia system, there's no paycheck anymore. There's no taxes to pay the paycheck. There's no resource allocation problem to pay the paychecks. The whole loop that we keep doing over and over again, where the people that have a problem have to like appeal to the goodwill of a couple millionaires in Washington, D.C., that hardly seems like a structure for stability. And shock and surprise, it hasn't been. It hasn't been terribly stable in the United States for a long time. And only by, you know, living in the poorest, shittiest, rinky-dink house on the edge of a very wealthy town was I able to sort of sneak through the system. And it was a sneak through, you know. Wake up and snow to come in the window, like just we lived in the shittiest of places because it was the worst possible living situation, which still had a relatively high rent, so that we could pay for it, pay just enough to live there, so we could go to this very wealthy school, paid for by rich mansions in the same municipality. Just this weird trick of where the lines were for the boundaries of the school. I happened to be inside the boundary for the good school. And I was lucky enough to be privileged in that way. Not everyone has that. So, while I love your mindset, I'd say think bigger. Are these actually really problems in a world where Technocopia exists? Technocopia machines existing as an option. Now, it's not to say that everyone's going to choose to opt in. If you want to opt out, that should be equally valid a choice. You don't want to play everything's free forever? Okay. You can play the everybody cuts everyone else's throat until someone wins game still, for some reason. Although I can't understand the appeal of it, I really can't. So I see that problem as something that you can solve simply by having this different structure for how resources are created and allocated in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, cool, great answer. Focus on education. Yeah. Yeah. We as a civilization can spend our time thinking about, you know, deep esoteric questions of existence and reality. Nailing down the really vitally important thing of educating our youth. Dedicating all of our labor to the things that really matter. Because why should you spend your time at a business being told what to do when really you know what you need to do? Everybody knows what they need to do. You know what needs to be done. Whether or not you can be paid to do it is an entirely different question. Who's got another utopian world they want to live in? Or would like to invite us to live in as well? What are you back here?
Would I be the only one with a machine like that?
No. You can assume that once the machine is created, there's at least one in every maker space in the world. So there's like 5,000 or 6,000 of them on day one. You just have to have one.
I mean, I wouldn't. I'm not gonna say I wouldn't opt in, but probably nothing much because I guess what's the point then? You know, every possible use case, you know, it's everywhere. You know, proliferated all throughout the world. Like anyone who could solve an issue and is solving problems. Like, what problems exist? I guess. What's the point?
Well, so do you like engineering? Do you like solving problems?
Oh, I like solving problems. I don't like problems being solved for me.
I don't think there'll ever be the end of problems.
Well,
You know, there's the end of scarcity is not the end of problems. And that's actually a really good point, that this does not solve all conflict. Some conflicts, yes. You know, there are plenty of political questions and ethnic questions that are still problems in the world, and this machine does not solve them. There's also, you know, push the bounds of current technology.
So I guess my point still stands though, right? Because if I mean, it's not going to solve every problem, but every problem that could be solved by the machine is still going to be.
Well, we're not going to say every problem is solved. We're just saying the subset of production. The machines solve food, shelter, healthcare, education, transportation, communication, and its own parts. Is that really all that can be made or should be made? You know, could we do anything in there more efficiently? Is there anything you could redesign to be better? You know, just, yes, there's always something you can do better. And here's the other fun part. Because of the way open source works, open source with attribution, you worked at a company, you did something and made it better. Well, you know, absolute best case scenario, you get a bonus. Worst case scenario, and very common, you get nothing. Just absolutely nothing but your paycheck. You solve a very important problem that makes the world a better place. No one will ever know. No one will ever know your name. No one will ever know that you did it. No one will ever know. You know, open source, it's completely different. Everything is attributed. You make a change. Who makes the change, when they make the change, is recorded for all of time. Part of posterity. It's the record of the creation of the thing. So if you solve a problem, you suddenly become the world famous, world leading expert in the new way of whatever it is. How this machine hands off things to that machine. How we can now have a new machine that produces a new type of material that we can make new products with. That, hey, there's this like vast production machine and nobody has, like the whole of humanity has not had access to it to invent new ways of making things with it. Don't just think about the machine itself, think about what you can make with it. Make buildings you've never been able to make before. Make structures, make automobiles and cars and planes that have never been made before. I really want a robot horse to ride. I've been watching Westworld again, and I watched them. I know the real horses in the movie, in the TV show, but like in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, They are riding around on a robot horse. That's the coolest effing thing. I want that so bad. Does anyone need a robot horse? Nobody needs that, you know, but it's suddenly the blending of engineering and art. That art is the act of creation for the purpose of creating and expressing. Engineering takes on the same characteristics. You art for the same reason you engineer. You engineer for the same reason you art. They are functionally equivalent at that point. You create because you are a passionate, capable, driven person who can create, whose creations are so worthwhile, the world will recognize it. And the recognition comes in the form of reproduction. You make a design and people reproduce it, now you're famous. You make a design that's pointless, nobody makes it, gone. I dare say every engineer in here should know the name Joseph Prusa. I hope everyone knows his name. Does everyone actually know who I'm talking about? Yeah. Joseph Prusa, yeah, he has a business. But he spent years creating core technologies that made the world a better place by creating the technology for a lot of the pieces of 3D printing that now are standard. You know, the smoothed out stainless steel hot end, the filament runout sensor, the multi-touch bed leveling. All of these were inventions of his, but not inventions in the proprietary patent sense in the open source domain. And they'll always be referenced back to him. We will speak his name for generations now.
So fame.
Fame, literally fame, mastery and fame. You know, the very idea that, and not just sort of crass Kardashian thing, like fame for doing something that actually made people's lives better. Because at the end of the day, what do we really want when we're being rich? It's not to have to worry about money and do the things we want to do, and be thought of as someone who's at the top of society. To be the best, to be the winner, you know? You have to develop a hoarder mentality to try to be wealthy. So clearly that's the motivation. External validation. So that validation is exactly what you'll get. The difference is you don't need to bring the money into the equation to get that validation. And again, the open source community demonstrate what that means. Why? All right. Joseph Prusa is not the best example. Linus Torvalds, Linux, you know, and Git, by the way. He wrote Linux and he wrote Git. So if you've ever used either one of those technologies, one person you have to thank for originally developing. And then the millions of other labor hours dedicated by the thousands of other engineers to those projects, making them even more better. I don't know many of their names, to be honest. But if I was a kernel developer, I certainly would, because I see their names every time I do the commit tree. And you see who's committed what. And it's, you know, fame is within a domain. Technology has its famous people. And you wander over to the art school and ask them who Joseph Prusa or Linus Torvalds is, probably not going to get as many answers. Meanwhile, if I, you know, ask you do shop artist, you get one two, you know, core, you know, creator in modernism. Everyone in the art school, yeah, of course we know who shop is, and so, yeah, Euro, whatever. But there's a reason why fame is domain specific. Now, I can list off a whole bunch of senators. Most people only know their own. It depends on to whom you are famous and for what reason. You know, and so there is a straighter line to that reward than there is in economics. Right, your hand up.
Yeah, what are you suggesting? Are you suggesting that that's our motivation, like, as people, I guess, as our driving force?
Autonomy, mastery, and recognition, yeah. Yeah, those are our core drives. That's humanity's core drives. Autonomy, mastery, recognition. Anything else is coercion. You know, the fear of the threat of pain and suffering. Anything that involves money, remember, what you're really saying is you can't eat or house yourself or access healthcare if you aren't participating in the forced labor system. It's coercion. Plain and simple. Nobody immediately has a right to exist in our society. Everyone is told that they need to earn a living, as if a living isn't guaranteed. As if you have to justify your right to exist. Which not just philosophically, I disagree with that on technical terms. That's just not true anymore. We're not in that kind of world where scarcity is real, absolute, and universal. Scarcity is simply created. We produce 8 or 9 times more food than people consume. We just have a crappy distribution system for it. Like, why? You know, for every homeless person, there are 30 empty homes. What? How does that make any sense? There's no scarcity of homes, so why is there a price? Coercion, power, money. These are not fundamental and unchangeable aspects of civilization. And more to the point, the basic equations are being changed as we speak, and there's really nothing we can do to prevent that from happening. Further, as participants in robotics technology, we are going to drive this one way or the other. And, you know, any direction we can drive it, but we're driving. One thing we're not doing is sitting still. Because if automation technology is ever at all useful, it, by definition, is eliminating someone's job. If it wasn't, then where exactly is the savings? Think about that really hard. If it's not eliminating a job, what exactly are you saving here? And if it's not an economic savings, who the hell is going to pay for it? If it's just cheaper and easier forever to pay people to do the thing, what justification is there for putting a robot in place? Why are businesses doing it? Why are they using business administration technologies to get rid of admins? Why are they using self-checkout line? Why? Why would they possibly do that? Because it eliminates jobs. This is like the whole point. It's the whole point. And whether or not it's taking a job that currently exists and making it go away, but instead saying we're going to increase the economy and just not hire more people, what's the same effect? Literally the same effect. The amount of goods and services are increased, the amount of labor paid to wages, or wages paid to labor has not increased. Therefore, more stuff, fewer money. Go back to that, how many hours does it take to access the thing equation? You realize, oh, that's what's driving it. So now do we understand why the amount of hours you have to work is going up? Because of automation technology. That's it, that's the source. There's millions of different kinds of automation technologies out there. The whole point is, it's getting rid of jobs. It is, by definition, or it wouldn't exist at all. Good. Time for my thoughts. All right, we're going to do a little thought experiment. This is a fun one for me. Sassy thing to say. Okay. Imagine at some point in your life, far in the future, your actions today, everything you do, is being observed. Imagine every little action you take as being observed by some entity, some person. That even the internal cognition processes, everything, every thought, every reason, every rationalization you apply to it, is being observed. And at some point, the observer is going to judge you for those actions. And by the time you get in front of this observer, those actions will not only be judged, but you will accept the judgment of the person judging you. And by the time that judgment is rendered, nothing you can do will change the actions. And that this person is observing you as you go. So quick question, who is this person?
You clearly Santa.
And
Yourself.
in what context?
The fact that you know it earlier when you were doing it and thinking, judge yourself, I guess, by the end of your life.
Right, so the older, wiser, better version of you. The one who understands the consequences because they're the ones who live through them now. And that the judgment is you observing your action now through the lens of your own memory. Then, of course, if you happen to be religious, you just get judged twice. Right? So, cool. But same principle applies. So if you know that there is something, there is a consequence, you know you knew it. You know you knew it at the time. And that person's judgment that you'll have to deal with. Because think, what are the ways out of that? Either you have to imagine your future self as literally a bad person, some immoral entity that no longer cares. You really want to think of yourself as a bad person for the rest of your life. Or you have to recognize that this better person, this better version of you is going to judge your actions. That even if you can't muster the self-judgment now, you just imagine the older, wiser version of you who has seen it, who has lived it, has experienced their way through this world as it worked or didn't, is going to render this judgment. And because it's you at the end of your life, there's nothing you can do at that point. You either pass through peacefully or with regrets. And so ultimately, the whole purpose of this lecture, this class, in my mind, is to make sure that when you are that older version of yourself, you can be there and be present without the regrets. Because you're going to be there someday, old and gray, living in the world that you spent your life creating. Knowing that you had the power to drive the change. Knowing that your choices every step of the way led to the world that you are in now. Now, if the world sucks and you fought against it, then you did everything you could. If the world's great and you didn't help, then you still bear the moral weight of your misdeeds. But if you act with knowledge, intention, and careful thought, and you start acting now, then you can live not only in a better world, but get to that better world and live your life through it. Kindness and generosity, making the world a better place, and end up without those judgments. You can end up happy with the decisions that you make. And it's by these criteria, as you go, knowing that you can't wiggle out of the morality of your actions, knowing that you are the one that are driving this bus, nobody else. You can make the world a better place or not. And it's not the most likely outcome. A better world is not the most likely outcome. It's going to require you to act with this knowledge and do hard things, make hard choices. Now, later, as you live your life, and as you create technologies, you can make the world a better place. We hope that you please decide to. I'm going to live in this world too. I am going to be subject to the decisions you make too. That's why I'm here. I'm here with credibility in the labs to show you how to make stuff. And with that credibility, I spend that credibility in these classes so that you'll listen to me. When I tell you, you can make it better. You can make these decisions to make these technologies. Because I know what it takes to make them. And I'm going to make it too. I'm living the life that I preach. Squint real closely and look at the Foisey production lab. That's my Technocopia machine prototype. Work in progress. Not quite there yet. I don't know if you noticed. And that's what it comes down to. People like me, making these open source technologies, we need your help. But more importantly than my needs are your needs. You need to live in a world that doesn't suck. So make the right choices, and you won't. That make sense? All right. I'll let you sit with that. So we're right about the end. Does anyone have something burning that they need to say? Or can we just sit with that thought? So I'd like to just let you sit with that. All right. Thank you very much. I will be contacting and working with Professor Putnam about what the new paper is associated with this series of lectures. It's mostly going to be elaborating on your utopian vision. What could you do? What is the world, imagine the world you want to live in. Imagine it with the hypothetical technologies we've talked about, and imagine it using the descriptive frameworks from our sources. Now, plan? Cool. Make cool robots. Make the world a better place. Thank you.